The story begins at the Rubedo family estate, where a young lady dressed in black is shouting at someone, "Art! You're late, don't you think? Just how long does it take you to slay a dragon?" she yelled from her chair. A young man with black hair and extremely tired eyes tells her that he was sorry, Lady Wenty, while his body shivers. Wenty then pouts and tells Art that she wanted to eat the dragon but her appetite was gone. "What's the matter, Wenty?" said a voice. It belonged to the Rubedo's family patriarch Lates, who was asking Wenty what is it. Wenty then tells him to listen. She tells her father that Art had once again failed in his duties. Art continues to shiver and shake while kneeling. But Lates calls his name, causing him to flinch. He looks at Art with disgust in his face, calling him a useless imbecile, and that he had entrusted Art with the role of butler to his beloved daughter, but had completely failed to meet his expectations. Art was shocked to hear these words and began to thinking that he was no good after all, and that his life had no meaning whatsoever, as he couldn't even live up to his master's expectations. Art sees that the two of them were still busy talking, but his vision begins to blur. As they called out to him, Art tells Wenty to leave it to him, but he soon collapses onto the ground. A flashback is seen from the past. Art was taken into the Rubedo family as a baby. He was trained to serve as a family butler. Long ago he and Wenty got along well, but things eventually changed. Wenty had soon developed a strong temper. Additionally, she demanded more and more, from housework to slaying beasts. In the end, Art had developed magic to serve her. Day after day, Art had done so many tasks just to meet her demand. Eventually, Art stopped thinking and began to move autonomously. A cat is seen on Late's lap as he speaks out about the fact that Art had collapsed from exhaustion. He tells Art that they could easily replace him and that he should get out of his sight, as Art was now a useless crap. Art is then seen locked outside the family's gates. With his eyes still tired, he bows his head towards them. Art begins to walk through the snowy forest with his exhausted soul. He thinks about what he should do now. He doesn't see a rock and trips over it, falling flat on the ground. He begins to form tears in his eyes as he felt worthless after being fired. His bottle of water leaks out as he lays on the ground in the forest till night time. Snow began to fall from the heavens, which slowly covers Art as he continues to lay on the ground without moving. He thinks about the fact that he only wanted Wenty to smile. Just as a wolf approaches growling, a fierce-looking wolf slowly walks towards Art, its eyes focused on his body as he remained on the ground. It soon lunges towards him with its sharp fangs. But Art had manages to block the wolf's attack with his blade, sending it flying towards a tree. Art looks at it with lifeless eyes. He then begins to walk towards it. Slowly raising his sword into the air, he tells the wolf that he was sorry. But a small yap-yap sound is heard, catching his attention. It was revealed to have come from a bunch of baby wolves that were shivering and growling at Art. He sees that the parent wolf began to stood up, and he watched them slowly disappear from his sight into the snowy forest. Art then looks at his sword in his hand. He squeezes his sword arm, thinking how close he was in becoming a monster. He then spots the bottle he dropped and sighs deeply at the loss of his water. He then decides to head west, where he could join the guild to make some money. Art had decided to sleep within a tree to hide from the cold weather. Through his journey to the west, Art had various encounters, ranging from being friends with a squirrel who helped him check if a mushroom was poisonous, facing off against a wild boar, and cooking the boar as a meal at night, and soon they finally parted ways with each other. Art had finally reached the city of Firen. As he walked through the crowds of the city, his dark aura surrounding his body caused others to be alerted to his presence. He soon reaches the Guild of Firen, where there were various people inside. Art was looking at the mission board, wondering what was the most fitting job would be for someone who was raised as a butler. With his tired eyes, he spots many extermination requests. He then grabs onto a mission letter, which was a laundry request for the Isfil family, which was perfect. He quickly rushes to the counter and tells the lady that he would be the one to take the Isfil family laundry request. The lady was shocked to hear this, and so were the other members of the guild. They tell him that countless people had tried that quest already, and that Art was being an idiot for taking it and that he should give it up, just as the lady at the counter was telling Art that the quest was not just any laundry request, but that nobody had succeeded in it till now. but something interrupts their talk as they both look behind. Art turns and sees a beautiful lady covered in blood, which made time feel like had stopped for the both of them. Art looks nervously at the lady covered in blood. The guild members talked amongst themselves, saying that it was Isfil the Ice Princess, and that she was both a novel and an adventurer. She sends a glare to the members which forced them to turn and walk away from her, but Art was blushing as he stares at her. She then throws the sack onto the counter, saying that she had brought the quest items, which were several boars. The lady at the counter thanks her for the hard work. She then informs the Ice Princess that somebody had accepted her quest to do her family's chores. She wondered where the person who accepted the quest was as she looks around. The lady at the counter tells her that Art was behind her. Art and Urk both stared at one another in silence. Urk then breaks the silence by introducing herself as the eldest daughter of the Isfil family, Isfil Urk. She then asks Art who he was. She tells him to spit it out, which he nervously agreed to. He kneels onto the ground and bows his head, telling her that his name was Art, and that he will do his best to service his master with all his dedication. The introduction left Urk to be stunned upon hearing it. Art then realizes that they had spouted a line that he had used as a butler. But Urk looked at him with an intense glare. She then tells him that monster blood doesn't wash out easily, and that it takes an entire day to clean one piece of clothing. With all that info, did he still want to give it a try, she asks. Art then looks up at her, telling her that he still wanted to do it. Urk then asks how long would he need. He tells her that he just needs an hour, which shocks her. Urk looks at him curiously and then tells him to come with her. The Isfil family estate has a beautiful mansion and fountain are seen with flowers and butterflies everywhere. Urk and Art are seen walking through the estate. They soon reached a gate where Urk tells Art that she needed to go change and wanted him to follow Tet the butler to the back garden. Tet tells Urk that the results of her effort are extraordinary as usual. Tet and Art exchanged greets as Tet tells him to follow him for the laundry. On their way there, Tet talks about how Urk became an adventurer to prove her worth according to the family's traditions, and that the Isfil family was a noble house with the rank of marquis. Art chuckles nervously upon hearing Urk's backstory. A scene is shown where Urk was bathing and soaping her body in the shower. They soon reached a bucket filled with a gross oro, which Art asked Tet if this was all the laundry. Tet explains to him that the blood of monsters permanently ruins clothes after 3 days, and that cleaning just one of them would be a labor that takes 3 people an entire day. But Art replies that it was no problem. Urk had arrived wearing a beautiful dress that catches our attention. Urk asks him if there was blood on her face, but Art replies nervously that there was none. She then giggles and tells him that him was a strange one and good luck with the laundry. Art sees this and blushes while thinking that she was totally different from Wendy. He then removes the cloak he was wearing. He bows his head and tells them to leave it to him. Art begins by grabbing a pail of water and tosses it onto the pile of laundry. The staff were amazed by Art's technique as it was perfect, but wondering if he needed help, but he declines. Urk sees him and notices that he had a skill as Art closes his eyes. He then rotates the laundry covered in water. Urk then realizes that he was using magic. She stares in amazement as she had never seen this kind of magic before. Art smiles as his magic was being casted. He had created this type of magic to do all his chores, making it his very own original domestic magic. Called bubbles, as multiple bubbles started to float into the air and around the estate. Urk sees the bubbles in the air and smiles, calling it beautiful. The laundry was now hung onto the line to dry. The staff gathered around it and commented about how it looked brand new and was spotless. Tet then turns around to ask Art how he did it. Art then explains that he had followed the concept of slimes that could absorb and digest anything they touched, and based on that principle, he had made a digestion spell to replace the digestive fluids with detergent to clean things. The staff was impressed that Art had made use of a monster's behavior and that it was brilliant. Urk then calls out to Art. She apologizes to Art for doubting him, which shocks both Tet and Art. She then tells Art that he was amazing for solving a problem so easily, as everyone was working hard to the bone over her laundry. But Art was stunned to hear that, as he considered it as easy. Urk then tells him that she wanted to ask him something. She asks him if it would be alright to call on him again, which caused Art to recall Wendy's strict commands. he immediately kneels down in front of Urk and tells her that he was hers to command. Fear and sweat trickle down Art's face as his body trembles while Urk looks at him. She then walks over to him and touches his face, telling him that she didn't know what kind of life he had lived, but that this wasn't an order. She offers her hand to him, telling him that it was a request instead. Art's face shined brightly as he thought of the word request having a nice ring to it. He recalls his past memories of when he was given orders constantly and that he didn't have a choice. As the staff gathered around Art, he realized that a request was different. He smiles knowing that he had the right to decide for himself. He smiles happily and tells Urk that if it's her request, just leave it to him, as it was from now that Art had began to live life. Art soon wakes up from the daylight of the morning into the sound of birds chirping. Urk sat beside him and tells him good morning. Art was stunned to see Urk after waking up. He screams in shock and looks around wondering where he was. He thinks deeply about why he was in bed, but could not remember a single thing. He looks around the room once more and sees Urk thinking that he did something he shouldn't have. Art then covers himself with a pillow to hide his embarrassment from Urk as he was in her room. But she asks him what was wrong and if he couldn't remember. As Art was hiding and blushing, Urk explained to him that after doing the laundry yesterday, he had collapsed from doing all the laundry at once. Art hits himself with the pillow thinking about how he had pushed himself too far using magic. Urk leans close to Art asking how he was feeling now. Art lifts the pillow up and tells her that he was much better due to her generosity. But Urk had to make sure and touches his forehead telling him not to lie as he still looked pale. This action caused Art to be knocked out as she tells him that Tet had prepared his reward. Tet brings in a huge chest filled with endless gold. Art was surprised to see the large amount of gold. Urk tells him that the Isfil family could afford this and asked if he had any plans elsewhere. He tells her that he didn't. Urk then snaps her finger calling for Tet. After a while, Art was seen wearing a brand new set of clothes. He asks Urk if it was okay for him to wear these as they were very nice. Urk tells him that it was clothing prepared for servants and that she plans to keep Art in her employ. She then tells Art that the clothes looked good on him. Hearing this made Art blush as he bows his head to thank her for allowing him to serve her. But Urk smacks Art, causing him to scream in pain. She looks him straight in the face and tells him to cut the formalities as they were the same age. Art smiles happily upon hearing those words from her. The three of them are then seen walking through the corridors to head to breakfast. On their way there, Art whispers to Tet about why Urk was acting so nice. Tet then explains to Art that Urk was the head of the family and was known as the Ice Princess, and if he had heard the rumors from the guild. He then continues to say that there were many nobles who hated commoners, which caused Art to recall Wendy's face, and that Urk absolutely hated those kinds of nobles, which also meant that Urk couldn't stand being in the presence of such individuals. Urk was the only noble they knew that shared the same perspective as commoners, making her a truly kind person. Art smiles happily hearing about Urk being a nice person as he knew that she had a lovely heart as well. They soon entered the dining room where the house head Ramon Isfil asked Art if he was the new guest. Art introduces himself to Ramon, but he tells him that he already knew the story and shouldn't act so stiff. Urk then calls out to Ramon about the dart circles underneath his eyes and that they were getting worse. She recommended that they go to a doctor. But Ramon declines the offer, saying he doesn't want to consult a doctor for this because he was just not sleeping properly in the beds of the house. But Urk was concerned as it has been going on for some time now and was afraid of what will happen if it continues. Ramon tells her that it would just be fate's will. Urk shouts at him for saying this, but Ramon tells her that he missed the imperial beds. He puts his head onto the table while talking about how the imperial beds were the best as it felt like you were sleeping clouds. Art then tells him that he could make one. Hearing this stuns everyone in the room, but Art continues to tell them that the material would be different from the imperial version, but it was still possible. Art looks around at everyone's faces and wonders if he had said something wrong. Tet then tells Art that he was wrong as making one of those beds takes a craftsman with decades of experience to do, and that it would take him at least a year to make it. Art then tells them about how his previous lord forced him to make it from a glance, causing everyone to think of Art being a poor thing. Ramon then offers to pay 10,000 gold for one bed, which shocks Art. He then tells Art that it will be quite a sight to see him build one, and if he had the talent he would be rewarded generously. Urk then requests Art if he could build one for her father. Art thinks about how long it had been since anyone had depended on him like this. He agrees to their requests and tell them that he would be grabbing some great blackbird feathers. Urk then tells him that she will come along as it was far too dangerous. In the Dorado forest area, Urk and Art are seen on a tree. Urk asks him if the feathers of the blackbird were extremely hard and dirty, making it hard to be like the imperial beds. She then recalls that the feathers of a great blackbird would make for some of the best adventurers' armor out there. Art then tells her to relax, as he wanted to show the people that needed him how well he could handle it. Urk agrees reluctantly and mentioned that the blackbird was a B-rank medium-sized monster which would be difficult to defeat. She then tells him that when it comes she will be the one to hunt it down. But Art tells her that he would do it. He then thinks about how the moment was strange as the blackbird should be roaming around here at this time of the day. A fierce roar was heard in the forest, catching Art's attention. "Above us!" Art shouts as a huge blackbird appears from the sky. It crashes into the tree where they were, causing a huge explosion. Urk tells Art to get down as she will be the one to hunt it down as they face off against the great blackbird. She then rushes towards the blackbird, shocking Art. She swings her massive sword towards the blackbird, but it deflects her attack with its black feathers. A chemical was then seen sizzling in the blackbird's mouth, which Art notices as an acid attack that he couldn't allow Urk to be hit by. He then casts his magic enhancement paralysis on his dagger and throws it towards the blackbird. It lands into the blackbird's throat, making it paralyzed. Seeing that the blackbird was paralyzed, Art exhales deeply and took a focused sword stance and soon unsheathes his blade from its cover. With a simple dash and slash, Art slices the head off the blackbird. Urk was stunned to see this as the blackbird's head falls to the ground. She calls out to Art, who asks her if she was okay, but Urk asked him what that sword technique was as she couldn't even see the sword hit it. Art says it was no big deal as he just casted his paralysis magic enhancement. Urk was shocked to hear that he could use such magic. She explains to him that there were only a handful of people that could do something like that. But Art tells her that they needed to skin the bird for the feathers. Urk then shows a hesitant face, which caused Art to ask her what was wrong. She tells him that it was nothing and took in a big gulp before stabbing the bird with her knife. Blood exploded all over her as Art stood in the back, shocked at what he was seeing. He then asks her if this was the reason why she was always covered in blood, to which Urk replies that he shouldn't telling anyone about this. Urk was then seen in the showering, washing herself with bubbles and soap all over her body. She then looks at the bucket filled with feathers and asked Art if they could really use these hard, black, filthy feathers for a bed. Art tells her to leave it to him and soon casted his original magic. Bubbles and feathers soon floated into the air due to Art's magic as everyone stares in amazement. They hold onto the newly washed white feathers as Art explains to them that the blackbird's feathers were white and soft, but after years of dirt they turn black and hard. Urk praises Art for his incredible knowledge. He then tells them that his previous employer wanted blackbird for dinner, making him study them a lot. They began to say it was fate and a coincidence that Art showed up like this. Hearing those words make Art blush, and he tells them that he could make more. After a while, the newly made bed was placed inside Ramon's room. He then leaps onto the bed and bounces. He tears and laughs as he sleeps on the bed. Urk and Tet couldn't believe that they were seeing him laugh that way. Ramon then yells at them to get out of his room to allow him to sleep. After some time, they peek into the room and could see him sleeping soundly. All the staff rush to Art asking if he could make one for them as well. Art agrees and smiles at the thought of making everyone happy like this. He then agrees to make a bed for everyone, causing all of them to celebrate with joy. Tet then asks Art about what he was going to do next, and that with his powers, some nobles would want to abuse it. Art thought deeply about his past with Wendy, and tells Tet with a smile on his face that he just wants to see everyone's happy faces. Urk smiles at his answer and tells him that she will be the one to protect his smile. Art blushes at the sight of Urk smiling at him. Tet sees the both of them laughing and smiling. As time passes by, Art then tells them that he will be heading back to his room first. But Urk grabs onto his wrist, telling him to wait, and asked if he could come to her terrace tonight. Urk is seen standing on the terrace as night falls. Art arrives and sees her face being lighted by the moonlight. He stares at her, dazzled by her beauty, as she turns to him and says, "You're here, Art," as the moon shined in the starry night. Art mentions to her that Ramon was now sleeping soundly, to which URL replies that it was thanks to him. He was glad to hear it, and soon a silence fell upon them as Art looks at Urk nervously while blushing. They soon caught each other trying to speak at the same time. Urk then decides to go first. She asks Art about where he had exactly come from, which causes Art to think about how he never mentioned it before. Art looks hesitant at answering her question, but Urk assures him that regardless of his answer, she will always be on his side. Art smiles and tells her thank you. He then went on to explain to Urk about his past with the Robeto family and serving Wendy as her butler. With a sad look in his eyes, he tells her about how he worked frantically to repay his debt to them, but in the end he had failed to meet their expectations, and that it was all his fault. Urk could only stare at him in silence after hearing him speak. Art then calls out to her, to which Urk asks him if that was really what he thinks. She opens her arms and tells Art that she wanted him exactly the way he was. But Art thinks deeply, knowing that he would be fine with Urk, but was still hesitating. Urk then tells him about how she hated being called the Ice Princess. As memories from 10 years ago was shown, Urk explained that her family was always prestigious amongst the nobility, even for Marquis, and that she had never given much thought to her family's position. She just wanted to be friends with everyone, or so she thought, until one day she spotted the girl she was playing with. The man tells the little girl if she was getting along well with the Marquis daughter, to which the little girl replies that Urk had given her a flower. The man says excellent work as Urk listens onto their conversation. The man continues to tell the little girl that URL was a wonderful tool to use in order to get closer to the royal family, and that the little girl should stay close to her. Tears begin to form in Urk's eyes as she listened to the man talk about how their family was only a viscount, which was lower nobility, and that they needed to do this to rise in society. Back to the present, Urk talks about how nobility of higher ranks hold incredible power. As she grips her hand tightly, she tells Urk that she felt cursed by her position. She then turns to Urk asking him if he hated nobility. Urk looks at him waiting for his reply, but Art tells her that he doesn't, which surprises her. He explains to her that being thrown out was incredibly painful, but upon seeing Urk and Ramon he realized that there were kind nobles as well. Hearing those words made Urk recall Art saying he just wanted to see everyone's happy faces. That's very like you said, Urk. She then tells him that they should head inside as it was getting cold outside. Art agrees straight away. But Urk was angry at the fact that the Robeto family had taken full advantage of Art's kindness and made sure to remember Robeto Wendy's name. The next day, wearing her armor, Urk tells Art that she will be going over to the guild today. Art tells her that he will follow, but Urk stretches his face, telling him that he needed to rest as he had worked a lot already. As they waves goodbye to another, Art overhears somebody calling the head maid outside the window. He sees that the maids were having trouble with handling the bugs which were going to eat the vegetables. He calls out to them saying that he had an idea. Soon after, the maids were amazed to see that the bugs were running away from the vegetables. Art then explains to them that he had used laundry and bestowal magic to attach Ramon's scent, a combination which drives the bugs away. A voice appears saying how impressive it was for Art to create this using bestowal magic. The voice belonged to a handsome young man who winks at the maids as they called out his name, Lord Fry. The head maid tells Fry that he should have let them know in advance that he was coming back so they could prepare his meals, while the other maids were swooning over and falling in love with Fry. Fry apologies to the maids as they left, talking about how cool he was. He soon turns his attention to Art and introduces himself as Isfil Fry, Urk's brother. Art then introduces himself to Fry, but Fry taps onto his shoulder rapidly, telling him he hated stiff formalities, but what was more important was how cute Urk is. Fry is a siscon, ladies and gentlemen. Fry soon asks for a handshake from Art. Art hesitates but still offers his hand. As Fry grips Art's hand, he notices something. He smiles and tells Art to duel with him, which causes Art to be confused, but he soon realizes that Fray's hand was cold. Fry looks at Art in a serious manner. "Aren't you really strong?" Fry asks as he holds Art's hand. Art and Fry are seen alone together. Art asks Fry if he really wanted to fight, to which Fry replies, "Of course, all that traveling is making me rusty." Art then asks why he wanted to fight. Fry then snaps his fingers at Art, telling him that he wanted to gain Onii-chan points while winking. Art then agrees to the fight if it means making Fry stronger. Fry instantly disappears and reappears behind Art, telling him, "Here I come." He then unleashes a powerful uppercut of his sword attack to Art, which Art manages to deflect. Frey's powerful attack could be seen from the skies. Amazing! You survived my attack. I knew it. You really are strong, said Frey as he smiles. Art on the other hand was checking the spot Frey hit him on, noting what a terrifying slash and that it was a one move that was equivalent to getting hit by a cannonball. Art then focuses his stance thinking that he needed to start getting serious. Frey sees this and realizes that Art was becoming serious. Frey then takes a step back and instantly leaps towards Art telling him he was going to speed up. A mad flurry of attacks came from Frey towards Art, but Art manages to deflect and attack according to Frey's attacks. Their attacks seemed to miss each other and made it look like they were on equal footing. But a sweat drop appears on Frey's face as he realized that Art was stronger than he thought, and that not even a single attack landed on him. Frey then unleashes another terrifying blow saying he won't lose. For my honor as the heir of the Isfeel family. As they continued to exchange blows with one another, Frey thinks about how if they show any form of weaknesses the other families could exert political pressure against them, and hence as the first son of the Isfeel family, he needed to be stronger than anyone else. In order to protect both his family and people. And in order to protect Urk. Just as Frey was thinking about going all out, he wondered where Art's limits were, but Art calls out to him. He tells Frey not to hold back and to wear him down. Frey hears this and decides that he won't hold back, summoning a huge ice flower in the skies above the two of them. Ramon was in the mansion when a loud noise throws him off guard. He looks out the window and sees the huge ice flower in the fields where Frey and Art were. Ramon wonders if it was Frey's doing and that he had came back unannounced. Frey explains to Art, who had been crushed by the frozen flower, that he could use bestowal magic with refrigeration to create ice. Ramon thinks about Frey's magic, about how that ice and its temperature in the air was lowered to condense the water vapor into ice, which was then formed into a weapon. But cracks soon started to appear in the flower frozen. Art had broken out of it without a single injury. Frey and Ramon were surprised to see that he had smashed the ice magic flower. Frey remarks about how amazing Art was and asked how he did it. Art then tells him that it was nothing special, as he just used his bestowal magic called friction to heat his sword and melt the ice. Ramon analyzes Art's words and noted that since magical ice is strong enough to shatter steel, however magical heat counters it. Ramon remarks how very clever. Frey looks at Art in amazement and noted that he sees why Urk took an interest in him. But Art replies nervously at the comment and mentioned that he and Urk had only met recently and thinks only about being useful to Urk. Both of them soon regained their serious game faces and lunge at one another at great speed. As their blades collide, Frey thinks about being an ultra-cool big brother, while Art thinks about paying back his debt. They stare at one another seriously once again and began their flurry of attacks against each other once more. Frey shouts out that this is interesting, very interesting. Art tells Frey that he was quite strong as he had never seen these techniques before. Frey smiles and thinks that Art was still holding back. He then tells Art that he was only at 70% of his power capacity as the sky starts to darken. A huge godly wolf with white eyes soon appear behind Frey as he tells Art that he will get serious. A calm and serious look was in Frey's eyes as mist appears all around them. He takes a serious fighting stance, recalling that in the distant past during the war between the gods and titans, a titan was known as the Great Wolf amassed fathomless power in a bid to destroy the gods with its prey in its sights. With one decisive blow its jaws rent the earth asunder and devastated the world. Frey then rushes towards Art with his god wolf as its attack was called Fenrir. Art sees this and begins to stand in his sword stance. It is said that a master is someone who becomes one with their technique, with a single technique in their whole being. They give their all to courageously strive forward, to transcend the limits of human reason. With a single swing of his blade, Art cuts through everything from Frey's Fenrir attack to even splitting the heavens into two. Art's sword breaks as he points the broken blade into Frey's face. Art was disappointed that his sword had broken and needed to still improve. Art recalls that the technique he used was a technique of the primordial creation which he discovered in the royal capital's archives and had diligently worked on improving it. Frey's face was filled with shock, but his son chuckles then laughs while slapping his face. He tells Art that he had one and that he was really strong. But Art refutes his statements and told Fry that if he didn't use magic he would have lost. Fry calls Art a good guy and thought about how Art had targeted the blade of his sword in order not to hurt him. Tet then arrives onto the scene and calls out to the both of them. He greets Fry about how long it had been and wondered if they were training swords again, as expected of a royal knight. Tet added. Art was shocked to hear the words royal knight. Fry then formally introduces himself to Art. He was the first chair of the Royal Knights Magic Academy, and the vice captain of the Royal Knights Isfiel Fry. He then links at Art telling him that he was basically the captain already and that he should keep it a secret, as only the king and Isfiel family knew about it. Disgusting, said a voice as a hand smacks a teacup away. We are now back in the horrible Rubdu house where a servant is apologizing to Wendy. She bits her nail thinking about where Art was and why her father had thrown him out. Her father then appears from behind the door wondering what the matter was. Wendy points at the servant and tells her father Lates to fire him, but Lates tells her that she would have fired the 10th servant so far and wondered if they were all that terrible. But Wendy screams at him telling Lates that they were all awful and how she hated this while wishing that Art was still here. Lates then informs her that there will be no end to the substitutes if they were meant to replace Art, but more importantly he informs her that the royal ball was in 3 days. Hearing this made Wendy happy to know that the royal ball was still taking place. Lates confirms it and thinks about how Wendy should be considering marriage as well as she dances around the room happily. She then opens the wardrobe which reveals a dark dress. She hugs it as it was a wonderful dress that Art had made for her, leaving the rest up to him. Urk is seen sipping tea in a beautiful garden. Just as Fry enters and shouts out loud, saying Urk, my dear beautiful sister, I'm home. But Urk looks at him in disgust. Fry continues to be happy and tears flow from his face as he shouts out Urk, aiming for a hug from her. But she ignores him and greets Art instead, causing Fry to slam into the ground. With blood dripping from his nose, Fry continues to call out to Urk saying her brother was here. But Urk continues to ignore him as Art thinks of their relationship as an odd one. Art then asks Urk about her request for today, which she informs him that she had gathered medicinal herbs for an orphanage. Fry was screaming in joy overhearing his sister's voice in the background. Hearing that she helped an orphanage, Art couldn't help but feel worthless. Urk then reminds him that he had helped them with the laundry and beds. Fry was shocked to hear this. Urk then tells Art that they should take it slowly together, putting one foot in front of the other. Hearing this angers Fry as he tells Art that they should duel again as he had just heard something that he can't condone as a brother. Hearing the word again catches Urk's attention as she stares with an intense glare. She yells at Fry asking if he was bullying Art, but Fry nervously tells her to stop it as he didn't do it, but an angry aura still arose from Urk as Fry tried to deny her claims. Big brother, I hate you, yelled Urk, which broke Fry. He collapses onto the ground saying it was all over and that his world had come to an end. Ramon then enters asking what the ruckus was all about. Fry calls him daddy and tells him that Urk said she hated him. Ramon then tells him to say sorry, to which Fry didn't want to do. Ramon then asks why he was home as there must be a reason for it. Fry then tells him that he had a message to deliver, and with a serious look he informs him that it was about that event. Art was curious about what event it was, but Ramon deflects the topic and asks what their plans were for the royal ball. Urk looked unhappy as she tells him that she didn't want to go, but Ramon reminded her that the Duke had requested for her audience. Art thinks about how the royal ball was a gathering where all of nobility get to strengthen their ties. Fry and Tet then declined the invitation to attend the ball as they were busy, which shocks Ramon as he was the one asking. The three of them then started thinking about who could attend in their stead. They needed someone who was reliable, had proper etiquette, and someone whom Urk could rely on. They all gaze at Art, causing him to fluster. Urk looks at him and decides that if Art was going she would go. Hearing this made Art blush. Tet then agrees with the decision as Art would be the perfect candidate to be a bodyguard to Urk and a representative for Fry. He then asks Art if he could represent the Isfiel family. Art took a moment to think and wondered if he could be useful to Urk. He then bows his head and agrees to take on the duty, making Urk happy as she tells him that she appreciates it. Urk then returns to the mansion as she needed a dress to be made. The head maid appears and informs Urk that she had grown again as she measures Urk's body. She blushes upon hearing those words and tells her not to say it. The head maid then informs her that since Art had arrived her chest has gotten even bigger. She then advises her that when a woman becomes aware of a man, their body will imitate certain developments. Essentially the woman wishes for the man to view her as a woman. Hearing this causes Urk to blush heavily as she wondered who she wanted to view her as a woman. But soon Art's face appeared in her mind. She was shocked and wondered why she had imagined his face. The head maid giggles and mentioned that they needed to have her bust enlarge. She whispers to Urk and asked if they needed Art's assistance, but Urk brushes her off, calling her a fool and that it was not needed, but the head maid teases her, saying that they just needed him to adjust her size. The two of them continue to argue about Art. Ramon is then seen asking about that event. Fry informs him about the eclipse locusts that he had brought up at an inappropriate time. Roman noted that it was taking place this year too, and that every few years, they would make an appearance in millions, destroying land and villages they sweep across the country. Fry tells him that the locusts had already struck Paul. Ramon notes that he was already informed, to which Fry expected, as he was more updated than the Lord Chancellor. Roman replies that the Lord of Paul was a friend and asked what he thought of Art. Fry responds that he thinks of Art as a good and honest kid who was a genius that was born only once every 1,000 years. But Ramon felt bad about Art's past history, which was incredibly harsh. Fry was glad they found him, as the bed he made was dangerously comfortable. Roman then tells Fry to leave the locusts to him and wanted Tet's report on the house of Rubedo. Tet reported to them that the former staff had told him about a dark rumor, which tells them that the Rubedo family had access to large sums of money from unauthorized sources, which were perhaps illegal businesses or other risky ventures. Roman hears this and thinks deeply, hoping that nothing happens. Night arrives and a carriage is seen in the forest. Art and Urk were sitting inside of the carriage. Urk had a sad expression on her face as she looks out the window. She then calls out Art's name. She touches the window and tells him that nobles are troublesome people. Hearing this made Art sad as he looks at her. He then calls out to Urk, who asks him what is it. He tells her that she looked beautiful. But URL tells him not to flatter her as the dress didn't fit, but Art tells her that she looks like a goddess. He then takes her hand and kneels before her, telling her that he swears to protect her no matter what may come. Urk and Art stare at each other, as Art had decided for himself that he won't be anyone's puppet. And that he was sure it would be fine for now, just as the carriage heads to a castle in the horizon. Urk and Art soon arrive in front of a giant door of a mansion with guards stationed outside. Art looks at Urk, who showed an uncomfortable expression on her face. He stares at her deeply before bringing out a perfume bottle, to which he casts cleanse and enchant perfume on her. He asks her if that had helped calm her down, to which Urk just stares at him. He then bows in front of her, asking if she would be so kind as to allow him to escort her. She gives a faint smile and says gladly. They soon enter the mansion with their arms intertwined with one another. The other nobles see Urk walking through and commented that she was as beautiful as an angel, and that Art wasn't too shabby himself. Urk felt embarrassed and thought of somebody who didn't come, but Art tells her not to worry, and informed her that he was here after all. Urk blushes as she hears those words from Art. The musicians in the hall began to play music. Urk and Art soon started to look around and noticed that the people around them were dancing. Art then calls out to Urk, offering his hand, and asked if he could have the pleasure of dancing with her. The both of them smile at one another before Urk agrees and holds his hand. They held each other close as they danced to the tune of the music. The more they danced together, the more embarrassed and shy they felt towards one another, which they noticed, but they soon laughed it off together and continued to happily dance to the music. Just as they were dancing, a lady notices them from afar. A lady rushes into Art's body and hugs him, interrupting the dance between him and Urk. Art was surprised by this sudden action. He recognizes her as Her Highness Leah, who tells him that they finally got to meet. Urk was stunned to see this as Art asks her to release him from her hug. Leah calls Art a wonderful person, which confuses both Art and Urk. She then recites the fact that Art was the one to save her Leah Drad from a dragon's wrath and was her knight in shining armor. She then tells him that she couldn't hold in her eagerness to meet him. Urk then interjects into the conversation. She asks Art why he had never tell her about this, but Art apologizes as he thought it wasn't important. Leah then recommends they go somewhere quieter first. Wendy had soon arrived in the hall wearing the black dress that Art made and was carrying a black fan with her father behind her. She walks through the hall as the people around her wonder why it was nosier than usual, and that it was because the princess had made an appearance. But Wendy was focused on what they were thinking about the dress that Art made, and if they couldn't take their eyes off her now. She then talks to her father wondering about which of the nobles had he picked to be her fiancé. Lates then points to a certain individual that was her future husband, but shock was written in her eyes as she sees where he pointed. Lates tells her that her finance was young Mr. Freymandagel, who was a large man stuffing his face full of food at a table, with shattered plates around and pieces of food on the ground. Wendy was taken back by the sight of this. She quickly turns to her father asking if he was kidding and that there was no way she could be with such an unsightly pig. But Lates immediately slaps her right in her bitchy face. Lates nervously laughs out loud and apologies to Freyman for the noise, and stated that Wendy was talking about the food. Wendy was in shock as she held the spot where her father had slapped her. She though about how it was the first time he had hit her just as Lates recommend they meet Freyman in the kitchen. Freyman's face was revealed up close with sauces on his face. He calls out to Wendy as his fiancée and tells her to come here. Wendy tears up upon seeing this horrible scene, as her black fan remains on the ground. Back to our favorite group, Urk asks Leah and Art how they were acquainted. Art explains to her that he had some business in the royal capital while Leah commented that he looked so cool when he defeated the dragon. Urk was a bit disappointed to hear this as it made her think that Art was nice to everyone. Leah then asks him if the thing she had sent was useful in his happenings. But Art was confused and asked what the thing she was talking about was. Leah then explained that she had sent a large number of gold bars from the royal treasury that she had permitted him to have, but Art continued to give a blurred look which Leah notices. She then asks if he didn't receive it, to which Art replies that he was sorry as he does not remember such a thing. Leah then changes the topic as she could send something else later and asked why Urk and Art had come to the party together. As they explained their reasoning to her, Leah realizes that she had been found out. She thinks about how love is blind, but Art doesn't even realize, just as he calls out to her. She grabs onto his arm asking him if he was free after this and if he would like to visit her place, but Urk joins in by grabbing his other arm telling her that Art couldn't go as he was her butler. The two of them argue as others watch while Leah tells Urk that Art would be happier by her side, but Urk refuses, saying that Art should decide. As they argue, a black dress is seen dashing by. Wendy was running away thinking that she refuses to be with a pig-like man and that she would rather die than marry him. But she soon trips on the carpet and falls flat on the ground. She begins to tear up thinking if only Art was here. As she lay on the ground with tears in her eyes, she overhears Urk and Leah arguing with one another. She then spots Art's flustered face between the two girls. Her face was filled with shock and then anger as she calls out Art's name, which he hears. "There you are!" she yelled as she walked towards them. Urk, Leah and Art were all stunned to see Wendy in front of them. A memory flashback is shown 8 years ago where there are signs on the gate with the words "Dunce, idiot, dumb girl, incompetent family." A young Wendy is seen upset while a young Art watches over her. She asks Art if he could go and punish the meanies. But Art tells her that they shouldn't as she would regret trying to go against. As young Miss was a nice person, he said with a smile. But hearing those words made Wendy angry as she wondered why he didn't save her. She thinks about how she was the only one who was suffering, which was unacceptable to her. Wendy asks Art with a smug look on her face where he was this entire time and if he had quit being her butler. But fear and shock made it hard for Art to reply to her. Seeing this angers Wendy as she turns and tells Art to leave with her. But Urk tells her to wait. She asks if she was Wendy Robetto. But Wendy asked Urk who she was. Urk didn't reveal who she was but instead told her that the rumors of her evil treatment were true. Wendy wonders who this high-handed woman was and sees her sliver hair, which belongs to the Isfeel family. Wendy recognizes her as the Ice Lady. She then bows her head to apologies for her discourtesy and wonders why Art was with the Isfeel family. Urk tells her to stand down and that she would overlook her impudence this time, but she needed to separate herself from Art. But Wendy tells her with a glare that it was up to Art to decide. The two of them soon enter into a staring contest. Art didn't think that this would happen when he decided to come here. But Wendy gives him the bombastic side-eye, telling him that her orders are absolute. Art's mind suddenly went blank upon hearing those words, and sweat began to drip more down his face. He soon realized that his words won't come out of his mouth. But Irk's voice snaps him out of his confusion. She asks him if he was feeling alright and that he shouldn't push himself. But Art tells her that it was nothing. Irk felt concerned as she heard him. Art thinks deeply about how if he went against Wendy it will rouse her temper, making trouble for Irk and Her Royal Highness. Irk then yells out to Art, wondering what was wrong. But Leah then asks Irk if she knew the story of Hyoko. Irk wonders why she was so calm. But Leah continues with her story, stating that after hatching, the Hyoko bird deems the first individual that they see as their parent figure. They've etched in the bird's memory for its entire lifespan, and it seems that ever since Art was born, he has been serving the Rubedo family, making Wendy's orders absolute. They could see that Art right now was being dominated by his fear of her, and that his brain was trying to rewrite his memories, while retaining his sense of self as he tries to return to who he was in the past. Hearing this upsets Irk. She bites hard, wondering why someone like Art, who could do almost anything and who was willing to do anything for others. Why was he willing to listen to orders from a horrible woman like Wendy? Irk's hand trembles in anger as she thinks that he was willing to be with someone who tramples over others' goodwill and for someone that will use him until he was knocking on death's door. Irk was upset as she asks Art why he had lied to him. Leah covers her face with her fan after hearing Irk. She then go over to Wendy to ask her a question. With a deadly look in her eyes, she asks Wendy where the gift of a mountain of gold she had left to Art was. Wendy was shocked at first, but then tells her that she didn't know what she was talking about. But Leah warns her not to feign ignorance as she heard it all from Art before. Wendy then pushes the blame onto her father, saying that it was something he was in control of, but Wendy was firm as she tells Leah that all of Art's belongings were hers as well. Leah replies that it seems that Art himself didn't know about this. But Wendy refutes back and turns to Art, saying that he knew something about it. Art could only stare and not speak as Leah remained silent. Wendy then touches Art's shoulder and whispers to him that there was nothing to worry about and that all he needed to do was listen to her orders. Fear took over him once again as he realized that he couldn't make sense of his words. Wendy then tells him that her order now was for him to act as if he already knew. His vision blurs as he thinks about how if he went against Wendy it would cause trouble for Irk. He knew that he needed to endure this all by himself. Art looks at Irk's concerned face and took a moment before saying yes. With a dead look on his face, Art tells them that he was aware. Wendy smiles upon hearing that and tells them that they would be returning. Irk then calls out to Art, asking if he remembers about the first day they met and how he helped her out with his cleaning magic, and that she made a request for him to confide in the Isfeel family regarding his wishes. But Art's face was still looking dead as Wendy tells him to hurry up. Irk continues to speak to him about how he treated her father's insomnia by making a bed, and that even today he had supported her and calmed her anxiety. She grips her fist hard and shouts out loud as Art was behind her, "I want you to rely on me, Art." Life scene began to appear on Art's face as he hears her words. Wendy shouts and orders him to not listen to Irk's words anymore. But Irk continues to speak about how Art was too kind to others, and that it was okay to not take on everything alone, as she wanted him to treat himself better. Hope starts to shine in Art's eyes as he turns to look at Irk, who tells him to face her properly one more. "It's a request, Art," she says with tears on the ground. She looks at him and tells him to stop lying to her. As Art and Irk stare at one another, he couldn't help but feel like the worst. He thinks about how he had betrayed the trust of all those kind-hearted people. He grips his chest upon realizing that he had even betrayed Irk. As Wendy tries to pull him away, he tries to reach out to her, thinking that he didn't mean to. Wendy yells at him that they were leaving and didn't need to stay with these people any longer. But Art could only think of how he was someone that could only take action upon receiving order, and that Irk had taught him about having his own free will. For someone like him who had no self-esteem, Irk had accepted him for who he was. Irk's faces were filled with tears as Art realized that all he did was disappoint her. He begins to tear up as he was torn away from Irk, that he had failed as a butler. But even then, he just didn't want to lie to Irk. Art had now freed himself from Wendy's evil clutches. "Pardon me for my rudeness, I actually did not know about the gold," Art said. Wendy was shocked to hear that. Leah was surprised while Urk was happy. Art then turns to Wendy telling her about how he was expelled from the house and that he was no longer her butler, but Wendy was confused and asked what he was talking about. With a firm, confident look in his eyes, Art begins to tell her. But Wendy orders him not to. Ignoring her words, Art bows his head and tells her that he was officially the Isfil family's Lady Urk's butler. Wendy felt doomed upon hearing those words from Art. Urk then tells her that if she tried to make Art do anything, she will have no choice but to intervene. Wendy knew that she must retaliate, as she recalls the memory of when Art called her a nice person. But her trembles as she tells them that they must be joking. She screams at them with tears in her eyes about why she has to when Art was always her. Leah then stops her and tells her that they were not yet done with the gold situation. She gives Wendy the bombastic side-eye, telling her that it's about time for her to be punished for her impudence towards the kingdom. Right here, right now, in front of all the nobles present. Chaos ensues as everyone started to run. Some shouted that Baron Rubetto was escaping, and so was the Flamin' House too. The guards began to look for them as they couldn't have gone far. Wendy looks around in confusion before telling Art that she will remember this before running away as well. But she then trips on her own dress, causing her to yell out in pain as she falls to the ground. She notices that her dress was torn but kept quiet, making her exit out of the ball as Leah looks at her running, saying, "Oh my." Urk then rushes to hug Art once Wendy was gone. Art was surprised by Urk's action, which causes him to blush heavily. She looks at him with a beautiful radiant smile and tells him welcome back. Art could only stare and tell her that he was back. But Leah interrupts their special moment, saying that she was the one who did the most work, and that it was quite rude for Art to do that as there was no other woman like her. Urk then tells her that she was disturbing Art, but a guard then appears, informing Leah and Urk about something. Urk asks him what it was and he whispered it into her ear. Art notices that Urk's expression was grim, as she tells him that it was bad. That in Felon, towards their house were what seemed to be a large swarm of black batters approaching. A voice is speaking out as a city is set in flames. Insufficient, insufficient, insufficient. Hunger, thirst, no matter how many times I eat, I'm never satisfied. A swarm of bugs are seen flying in the air towards the burning city. No thanks, I'm out of here. Sorry for the delay, I had to bring back our voice artist. Back to the story. A man is seen with a coat hanging on his shoulders. He introduces himself as Peter, the guild master of the place. Art looks at him nervously, but Ramon assures him as he told him that Peter may not look much, but he could trust him. Peter then went straight into the details. He tells Art that it was around 20 years ago that the bugs started to get imported into the famine-struck kingdom. It was because of their black and hard shells that they don't die easily. On top of that, they also had a very large appetite, resulting in efficient reproduction. Art recalls from the royal capital books that it recounted that there was a swarm of between 100 million to a billion of them. Peter then informs him that the cities of Onyx Pearl and Garnet had already been decimated. Ramon added on that there was always a substantial amount of damage. But Peter tells them that this time it was much worse than the previous waves, as this time there was 500 billion of them. Hell no, I'm sorry guys, I'm out of here once again. It's okay, I brought him back guys. Now back to the story. Urk was surprised to hear that there were 500 billion while Fry wondered why there were so many. Ramen then says they have started to appear with a serious look on his face, but Tet couldn't believe it as it shouldn't be the time for them to show up. It was the pure queen batter's manifestation. A glowing white bug lady was seen amongst the billions of black batters. Urk didn't know what that was, so Peter explains to her that the black ones are the common ones, and that the ones that are particularly light and huge are the pure ones. Tet then assumes that it meant they were ranked as the most dangerous ones, making it an S rank. Peter wanted to beat it first, but realized that it only takes one of it to raise an entire country to the ground. Ramon then asks how long until it arrives. Peter tells him in 1 week's time. Fry shouts out that it was too soon and that they wouldn't be able to make it after forming the extermination party, but Ramon tells him that it was not all. He points to the map of Drad, informing the others that if the bugs continue on their route, the royal capital Drad will ultimately end up getting attacked. Ramon's hinted that this was going to be the largest disaster ever since the country was founded, but Art puts up his hand, telling them that he had a suggestion. Peter tells him to hold on as this wasn't a safe place for a kid like him. But Urk reminds him that Art wasn't who he assumes him to be. Ramon then stops Peter as well and told the others to hear what Art has to say. Art then brings out a bottle with a cork. Peter recognizes it as lemon water. Art tells him that he brought some because of his sore throat, but later realizes that he could apply bug-repelling magic to it. Peter then tells him to not joke around, but one of the maids screams out that it was that thing. The head maid tells her to quiet down, but she tells her that the lemon water had made the bugs stop approaching even when she didn't use much of it. Art then tells them that if all goes well, it could buy them time for the next 2 days. Fry wonders if Art was serious, while Tet was surprised to learn that they could slow down the great disaster. Roman was impressed at the idea and that it came from the guy who made his bed. Fry and Irk praise Art for his idea because of his exceptional abilities and that he was already stronger than Art. Peter looks impressed by the idea, and he soon turns his head towards Art asking if he can do it, kiddo. Art was happy to hear those words. Ramon commented on how blunt Peter was, but Peter assures him that he couldn't help it as he didn't know any other way to ask for help. Art then calls out to Peter, bowing his head and telling him that he could leave it all to him. Ramon then informs them that he will send a message to the king so that they could gather troops, and that he will leave the rest of the work to Art. Art was happy to hear that Ramon considered him as part of the family. He recalls the happy memories of the Isfeel family, and firms his resolution in ensuring that no matter what happens he would protect the Isfeel family. Irk stares at Art and wonders how amazing it was for Art to stand up for anyone. Peter then tells them that he would collect everyone's information and would meet them at the guild in 2 days. Irk was then seen standing still in the shower as water continues to pour over her body. She thinks about how Art gives all of his powers for her sake. She thought deeply about how she had wanted him to rely on her, and that it was every she wanted. But she ended up always being the one that needed to be saved. She ponders these thoughts as the shower water continues to pour into the drain. A carriage wheel is seen speeding at a fast rate as a voice spoke out wondering if it was okay for them to sneak out without informing someone. It was Leah and her servant who were speeding away, as Leah thought about how she couldn't allow the Ice Princess to take Art away from her. "Wait until I get to you, Art," she yelled out as many carriages are seen riding fast. Thanks for watching the latest part from the voice of Manhwa. Subscribe for more content and don't forget to comment below what you want to see in the future. Like and share for more.